There is a price you may be paying every single day, and the unsettling part is that most people never realize it. It shows up as a constant background anxiety that never completely disappears, relationships that feel strangely distant even when you care deeply about the people in your life, and that quiet frustration of trying to change your life, but somehow ending up in the same place again and again. The strange thing is that this price is not being charged by your circumstances, your job, or the world around you. It comes from something far more subtle, something happening inside your own mind. The mistake is so small that almost no one notices it, yet it quietly shapes the quality of every moment you experience. Most people have been taught to believe that the endless stream of thoughts in their head is who they are. But what if that assumption is the very thing keeping you trapped? What if the voice constantly narrating, judging, planning, and worrying inside your mind is not actually you at all? Welcome to the Inner Code, where we explore the hidden mechanics of consciousness and the forces shaping the reality you experience every day. Here's something even more surprising. Neuroscience now confirms that nearly 95% of our daily lives operate on something called autopilot. That means the majority of the day passes while your mind is somewhere else entirely, replaying the past, imagining the future, worrying about things that have not happened yet. Think about the last time you drove somewhere familiar. Do you remember every turn, every street, every moment of that drive? Or did you suddenly arrive and realize your mind had been somewhere else the entire time? That is autopilot. It is not rare. It is the default operating system of the human brain. The unsettling implication is that much of life is happening while you are not truly present for it. Hours pass, experiences unfold, conversations happen, yet your consciousness is only partially involved. Over time, this creates a subtle trance where life continues moving forward, but you feel strangely disconnected from it. The deeper problem is that most people mistake this autopilot voice for their true identity. They believe they are the nonstop stream of thoughts moving through their mind. And this single misunderstanding is the hidden root behind so much anxiety and inner struggle. Because when you believe you are your thoughts, every fearful scenario your mind imagines begins to feel like a real threat unfolding in front of you. 217. The danger is mentally created, but your suffering is real. That constant state of alert drains your vital energy. You live in survival mode, activated by threats that exist only as shadows in your mind. The biology of stress becomes your baseline, creating fertile ground for chronic exhaustion and a general feeling of fear and insecurity. This anxiety feeds on your belief that you are your mind. If you are your thoughts, then every fearful thought becomes an existential threat. Then look at your relationships. How many times have you been with someone you love, but your attention was completely hijacked by worries or inner distractions? The other person feels that invisible barrier. They see your body, but they do not feel your presence, and that creates a sense of superficiality and also loneliness. This repeated mental absence slowly erodes intimacy and trust. The connection becomes fragile because it is not being nourished by the energy of full attention. People begin to feel that they are not truly heard or seen because they are interacting with your mental narrative, not with your real and attentive presence. Conversations become exchanges of information, not meetings of souls. Genuine connection requires a presence that the noisy mind simply cannot offer. Now, let's talk about your attempts to change your life. Have you ever tried using affirmations or visualizations, but felt like something was not working the way you expected? You try hard to think abundance, but an inner voice screams lack. You try to visualize success, but the feeling of failure is still there. This happens because you are trying to use the mind to control the mind itself. It is like asking the narrator to change the script of the movie while reading it. The techniques fail not because they are useless, but because they are being applied from the wrong level. They are being operated by the same entity that creates the original problem. Willpower gets exhausted quickly in this inner battle because you are fighting the very mental programs that define your perception of reality. All of this is reinforced by a deep social paradigm. We were taught to worship thought as the peak of human evolution, and that is a mistake. Our culture values the mind that analyzes, calculates, and worries nonstop. A quiet mind is mistaken for an empty, unproductive, or lazy one. This glorification of nonstop thinking sells us the idea that a busy mind is a sign of importance and intelligence, and that is a huge illusion. Many believe that being productive means always having a full mind, when in fact, the greatest innovations and inner peace are born precisely from the space between thoughts. Most of us believe that thinking more about a problem is the only way to solve it. For them, if we are suffering, the solution must be to analyze more, understand more, think more. This belief traps you in a vicious cycle. The more you try to think your way into peace, the more you activate the thought machine that destroys it. The result is the mental exhaustion that so many people feel. It is the weight of carrying a tool that never turns off, operating even when it should be resting. You live as if you were the commentator of your own life instead of the main character. You react to the mind's narrations as if they were absolute truth. This identification with thought is not some abstract philosophical concept. It is the mechanism behind your emotional reactivity, your procrastination, and your frustration. It is the reason why you know what you need to do to improve, but seem unable to put it into practice in a consistent and truly lasting way. Autopilot is not your enemy. It is simply a mechanism operating from a false premise. The premise that you are the thinker. This condition keeps you trapped in repetitive patterns of behavior. You react to the same situations in the same ways, expecting that one day the result will be different. You are lost in the story the mind tells about you, the world, and other people. A story that most of the time you did not even choose. This mental narrative is made up of old fears, inherited beliefs, and social conditioning, and you defend it as if it were your true identity. Life becomes a reaction to this inner story instead of a creative and present response to the moment that is actually happening. Now, to understand the way out of this cycle, we first need to define the two elements in play. On one side, we have the mind which narrates. On the other, consciousness which observes. The mind is a story-making machine, a biological survival tool. Its function is to analyze the past, project the future, and create meaning from data. It operates automatically like software running in the background. It does not ask whether you want a music, think. It simply thinks nonstop at every moment. That voice in your head, the inner commentator, is not you. It is just the function of the mind, a flow of energy and information passing through your brain. It is programmed to find problems and predict danger. That is why most of your spontaneous thoughts tend to be negative or based on worry. This nonstop activity is a tool, not your identity. Confusing the two is like a carpenter believing he is the hammer in his hands. Consciousness, on the other hand, is something completely different. It does not produce thoughts. It is the space in which thoughts are perceived appearing and disappearing. It is the quality of being aware. Pure perception, silent and without judgment. The light that illuminates the content of your mind without being that content. Let's use a simple analogy to illustrate this fundamental difference. Imagine that your thoughts are like clouds passing through the sky. They are constantly changing. The clouds may be dense and dark like fearful thoughts, or they may be light and white like joyful thoughts. They are never permanent. Consciousness is the sky, the vast, open, unchanging space that contains all the clouds. The sky is not affected by weather, by storm, or by the sun. When you identify with your thoughts, you become the cloud. Your peace depends on the mental weather of the day, which is totally unpredictable and inconsistent. When you recognize that you are consciousness, you become the sky. You watch the clouds pass without being disturbed by them because they are not you. This distinction is not just poetry or philosophy. Modern neuroscience is beginning to map the neural basis of this phenomenon, validating what the wise already knew. Scientists identified a network of brain regions called the default mode network. It is the foundation of autopilot. This network becomes more active when we are not focused on a specific task. It is the circuit of daydreaming, rumination about the past, and anxiety about the future. In other words, the default mode network is the neurological seat of that inner voice narrating your life, creating the sense of a separate and constant self. The intense activity of this network corresponds directly to the subjective experience of feeling lost in thought, trapped in a mental dialogue that seems never-ending. When you are lost in thought, this network is operating at full capacity. It is the biology behind identification with the mind. But what happens when we observe the brains of people who trained attention for years, like Buddhist monks with decades of meditation practice? Brain imaging studies show significantly reduced activity in the default mode network of these practitioners, even when they are not formally meditating at that exact moment. This does not mean they completely stop thinking. It means they stopped automatically engaging with the stream of thoughts the mind produces. They weaken the compulsive connection with the inner narrator. They learn to rest as the sky, not to agitate as the clouds. This leads us to question one of the most famous phrases in Western philosophy, one that shaped our modern identity. I think, therefore I am by René Dirt. That statement placed thought at the center of human existence. It taught us that our fundamental identity is tied to our ability to think. This is the fundamental mistake of modern identity. It places the tool, which is the mind, in a position above the master, which is consciousness. Many believe that if we stop thinking, we will stop existing. This idea creates a deep fear of silencing the mind because it feels like annihilation of the self. But the experience of meditators and the data from neuroscience suggest a correction, a new way of seeing our existence in a much more accurate way. The truth is that you can observe a thought. Therefore, you must be something separate from it and prior to it. The observer comes before what is observed. Thought needs a field of consciousness in order to exist. Without consciousness to perceive it, a thought could not even be known. Consciousness does not need thought in order to exist. Think of deep, dreamless sleep. Thought stops, but fundamental consciousness remains present and alive. So perhaps a more accurate statement would be, I am conscious and therefore I know that I think, or simply, I am conscious, therefore I exist. This small shift in perspective is revolutionary. It moves your identity from the temporary content of the mind to the eternal space of consciousness. You stop being the story and become the one hearing the story. You stop being the actor and become the space in which the play happens. The mind continues to be a useful tool for solving practical problems and navigating the world. But it returns to its original position, that of a servant. You, consciousness, become the master, the presence that decides which thoughts to engage with, and music, which thoughts to simply let pass like clouds in the sky. The separation between mind and consciousness is the first step out of the trance. It is the map that shows where you really are and where you thought you were. Once you begin to understand the difference between the mind and consciousness, something remarkable becomes clear. This is not just a philosophical curiosity or an abstract spiritual idea. It directly shapes the quality of your everyday experience and your ability to influence the reality you live in. When a person believes they are their mind, emotional suffering quietly becomes the default setting of their life. And in that state, the ability to consciously shape your life feels almost impossible. Take anxiety as a simple example. Your mind imagines a future scenario that has not happened yet. Maybe it is an uncomfortable meeting tomorrow morning, a financial problem you might face next month, or a conversation you are afraid to have. To the mind, these are just thoughts, but your body cannot tell the difference between imagination and reality. The moment the mind creates a threatening story, the body responds exactly as if the danger were real. Stress hormones flood your system, your heart rate rises, your breathing becomes shallow, and your stomach tightens. The danger exists only as a cloud of thought, yet the suffering becomes physically real. This happens because when you identify with the mind, you give that mental narrative permission to take control of your entire biological system. Your nervous system reacts to imagined threats the same way it would react to a real one. But this misunderstanding does not only affect anxiety. It also affects the way people try to change their lives. Many people today talk about manifestation, but most of them unknowingly approach it from the wrong level of awareness. They are told to constantly think about what they want. Think about success. Think about abundance. Think about the life you wish to create. Yet something strange often happens. The more a person obsessively thinks about what they want, the further away it seems to feel. This paradox frustrates countless people because they believe they are doing everything correctly. But look closely at what is happening inside the mind. When someone thinks, I want more money, the emotional tone underneath that thought is usually not abundance. It is lack. The body feels the absence of what is desired. The nervous system experiences scarcity in the present moment. In other words, the mind is broadcasting a signal of not having, even while imagining having. Your energy does not resonate with abundance. It resonates with the feeling of not enough. This is where physics offers a powerful metaphor that helps explain the difference between thinking and observing. In the famous double-slit experiment, particles of energy behave like waves when they are not being observed. In that state, they exist as pure potential, capable of becoming many different outcomes at once. But the moment an observer measures the system, something extraordinary happens. The wave collapses into a specific particle. Possibility becomes reality. The key word here is observer. The observer is not the analytical mind thinking about reality. The observer is silent awareness itself. The witness. The mind thinks about life. Consciousness experiences life directly. And when attention becomes deeply focused through awareness rather than thought, potential begins to organize itself into a specific experience. This is why meditating while constantly thinking about your goals often reinforces the feeling that they have not yet arrived. The mind keeps repeating the story of desire. But meditation from consciousness is completely different. Instead of thinking about the outcome, you allow yourself to feel the emotional state of the outcome already being real. You do not think about gratitude. You embody gratitude. You do not visualize peace as something distant. You become the field of peace itself. And that subtle shift completely changes the dynamic of creation. Instead of chasing reality, you begin aligning with it. Instead of forcing results, you allow circumstances to reorganize around the state of being you embody. But this confusion between mind and consciousness does not only influence manifestation. It also quietly damages human relationships. Imagine sitting with someone you care deeply about. They are speaking to you, sharing something important. Yet while their words are unfolding, your mind is already somewhere else. Perhaps you are preparing your response. Perhaps you are replaying something that happened earlier in the day. Maybe you are worrying about something tomorrow. To the other person, this absence is almost immediately noticeable. They see your body sitting there, but they cannot feel your presence. And when presence disappears, connection weakens. Over time, this creates a subtle loneliness even when people are physically together. Conversations become exchanges of information rather than meaningful encounters between two human beings. True connection requires something the analytical mind cannot offer. It requires presence. When consciousness is present, something extraordinary happens. In relationships, you begin to hear not only the words someone speaks, but the emotion behind them. Your response comes from awareness rather than mental reaction. And suddenly communication becomes deeper, calmer, and more authentic. The same principle applies to intuition. Many people mistakenly believe intuition is a mysterious type of thinking. In reality, intuition is the opposite of analytical thought. Logical thinking is slow and sequential. It analyzes pieces of information from the past and gradually forms a conclusion. Intuition, on the other hand, appears instantly. It emerges from silence. It is a direct knowing that arrives without analysis. You feel it in the body before the mind even begins to explain it. Intuition is the language of consciousness. But when the mind is constantly noisy with analysis and worry, that quiet signal becomes impossible to hear. Anxiety, failed manifestation, shallow relationships, and blocked intuition are not separate life problems. They are all different symptoms of the same misunderstanding. The belief that you are the voice in your head rather than the awareness that hears it. When you live as the mind, you become reactive. Every thought, every emotion, every external circumstance pushes you in a different direction. But when you awaken to consciousness, something changes fundamentally. You become creative rather than reactive. Your identity anchors itself in a space of inner stability that is not shaken by every passing thought. You stop trying to control the clouds. And for the first time, you discover the freedom of being the sky. 2019. Noticing these consequences in your everyday life is what makes this distinction so vital. It stops being an idea and becomes a lived truth. The proof of this dynamic is not only in our daily experience, but also in scientific studies that map the brain in different states of consciousness. Neuroscience allows us to see in real time the physical difference between being lost in the mind and being anchored in consciousness in a way that was impossible before. When you are analyzing, worrying, or stressed, your brain operates mostly in beta waves. This is the state of alertness and intense mental activity, the constant noise. Beta waves are the electrical signature of the thinker. They are necessary to solve problems, but when chronic, they lead to exhaustion, anxiety, and mental burnout. When you shift your identity from thought to observation, the electrical pattern of your brain literally and completely changes into a different signature. The brain begins to produce more alpha and theta waves. These are the waves of presence, deep relaxation, creativity, and sharper intuition. This is not a state of sleep or inattention. It is a state of relaxed awareness where you are more aware than ever, yet free from effort. You move from the state of doing to the state of being. And this shift has a direct and observable impact on solving very concrete problems. Let's use a practical and powerful example. The treatment of chronic depression, which is a condition where a person gets trapped in cycles of negative thoughts. The traditional approach, like cognitive therapy, operates at the level of the mind. It teaches you to identify dysfunctional thoughts and challenge them with logic. It is a battle of the mind against itself. You use a rational thought to fight an irrational thought, which can be extremely tiring and exhausting. This approach has its value, but it keeps the person on the battlefield of thought. Their identity still remains that of the thinker who needs to fix himself. Now consider an approach based on consciousness like mindfulness meditation, which has been rigorously studied as a tool for depression. Here the goal is not to change the depressive thought. The instruction is not to fight the dark cloud or to try to argue logically against its existence. Instead, you are taught to observe the thought with curiosity and without judgment. You notice it arise, remain for a while, and then disappear. You learn to feel sadness in the body without fusing with the story the mind tells about it. You become the space for the emotion. This practice trains the brain to deactivate the default mode network, the autopilot. You weaken the compulsive identification with the depressive narrative. The practical result of this is profound. In various clinical studies, mindfulness-based therapy proved to be just as effective as antidepressants in preventing relapse. Think about what that means. Simply changing your relationship with thoughts from fighter to observer has the same biological power as medication. This shows that suffering does not come from the thought itself, but from your belief that you are that thought and that you have to get rid of it. Freedom is not in winning the mental war, but in realizing that you were never the soldier. You were always the battlefield, the space itself. This same deactivation of the default mode network, which is the basis of the ego, is also observed in studies with psychedelics, which lead to experiences of dissolution. This modern research mirrors what ancient traditions like Zen, Vedanta, and Vipassana have taught for thousands of years in different ways. All of them point to the same central truth. Consciousness is more fundamental than thought. Thought arises within consciousness, but never the other way around. Contemporary philosophy also recognizes this mystery through what David Chalmers called the hard problem of consciousness. One of the greatest challenges of our time. The problem is this. Science can explain how the brain processes information, which is the easy part. But it cannot explain why we have subjective experience. Why does red light look like red? Why does chocolate have a specific taste? This quality of experience called qualia is unexplained. No brain scan can show a scientist what it feels like to be in love or to feel deep inner peace. There is nothing that explains that subjective experience cannot be reduced to mere electrical signals. This suggests that consciousness is not just a byproduct of the brain, like smoke from an engine. Many physicists and philosophers now consider the possibility that consciousness is fundamental in the universe, just like space, time, and matter. In deep sleep, for example, your thinking mind and your personal identity completely disappear, but consciousness continues to be present. Otherwise, you would not wake up in the same body. That silent, formless background consciousness is your true self. It is the sky that remains even when all the clouds of thought disappear. You are not a brain producing consciousness. You are the consciousness using a brain to experience this three-dimensional reality in a unique way. Ancient traditions did not need magnetic resonance imaging to validate this. They discovered it through direct observation of inner experience and the mind. What science does today is give us a new language and a new set of proofs to understand a wisdom that has always been available to all of us. It gives us the logical confidence to explore our own inner space, to test for ourselves the difference between thinking and simply being. Recognizing this evidence is crucial for the skeptic within us. It is the permission our logical mind needs in order to surrender to something deeper. Understanding this intellectually is the first step. The second and most important is to bring this distinction into daily practice. All the knowledge we have discussed up to this point is useless if it does not transform your real experience of life. So let's make this practical now. I am not here to offer a magic solution, but a training, a concrete path to cultivate the separation between mind and consciousness. The simplest and most powerful tool to begin with is a question. A question you can ask yourself at any moment, especially when the mind is noisy. In the middle of a worried thought, stop and ask inwardly. Who is noticing this thought right now? Just ask the music, question, and wait. The goal is not to find a logical answer to that question. The power is in the question itself, which creates a small pause in the automatic mental flow. For an instant, your identification shifts from the thought to the silent observer. You remember that you are the sky, not the passing cloud. This leads us to the fundamental principle of this practice: observation without judgment. This is the point where most people get lost and end up giving up. Many try to suppress or fight the thoughts they do not like. That fight is a trap because it only gives more energy to the thought they are resisting. After all, what you resist persists. Fighting with the mind is using the mind itself to attack itself. It is a war that you can never win. The true practice is to allow the thought to be there like a cloud. You observe it without clinging to it and without trying to push it away. Snorts. You treat it with curious neutrality, like a scientist observing a phenomenon without judgment, without criticism, and especially without emotional involvement in it. Now, let's move to a practical exercise that you can do for a few minutes. Sit in a quiet place and simply focus your attention on your breathing. Feel the air coming in and going out without trying to control the rhythm. The breath is your anchor in the present moment, your constant point of reference. Inevitably, within a few seconds, your mind will drift away. It will generate a thought, a memory, or a worry. That is completely normal. This is the most important moment of the practice. Do not get frustrated. Distraction is not failure. It is the opportunity to train your consciousness. Simply notice that the mind got distracted and gently bring your attention back to your breath. No fighting, no judging yourself. Each gentle return is like a repetition in a workout. You are strengthening the muscle of attention and weakening the compulsion of autopilot. The goal is not to have a silent mind. The goal is to notice the noise without getting lost in it and return to the center of your inner peace. But how do you apply this in the chaos of everyday life? Think of an argument or a stressful moment at work. Normally, an external trigger generates an immediate inner reaction. Someone says something, and your mind launches a defensive response before you even notice. The practice of consciousness creates a small space between the stimulus and your response. A moment of pause where choice finally becomes possible. In that space, you can observe the impulse to react with anger. You can feel the emotion in the music, body, but without being controlled by it. You can then choose to respond consciously instead of reacting automatically. This is the foundation of emotional intelligence and real communication. Your freedom lies in this small space that you learn to cultivate. The freedom not to be a slave to your own programmed emotional reactions. This same presence transforms your relationships in a deep way. When you are with someone, you are truly there, not somewhere else. You listen with your whole being, not just with your ears. The other person feels this quality of attention, and the connection naturally deepens. Your decisions also change fundamentally in quality. Instead of deciding based on fear projected by the mind, you learn to listen to your intuition. You feel the answers in your body in an inner silence. You access a wisdom that logic alone could never reach. This takes us back to manifestation. Remember, thinking about something reinforces its absence. It is an act of the mind which lives in duality. Conscious manifestation, on the other hand, is an act of being. It is about cultivating the vibrational state of your desire already fulfilled right now. This practice of observing thoughts and returning to the body is the training for being. You learn to generate the feeling regardless of the circumstances. Snorts. You stop trying to manipulate the outer world with your thoughts. Instead, you become the energetic field that attracts the corresponding reality. This path does not promise overnight results. It is a continuous practice, a way of living that requires patience and self-compassion at all times. It is a process of unlearning and identification that has lasted a lifetime. Be gentle with yourself throughout the path. Every moment of consciousness is a victory. What matters most is consistency, not intensity. 5 minutes of conscious practice every day are worth more than 1 hour once a month. You are rewiring your brain and your nervous system. This takes time, but the results are permanent and transformative, not temporary. The journey is not about reaching perfection, but about continuous return. It is the practice of coming back to consciousness moment after moment. In this process, you stop identifying with the story your mind tells. At the deepest level, everything we explored in this video leads to one simple realization. You are not the story constantly running through your mind. You are the silent space that allows every story to appear, unfold, and disappear. When you begin to see this clearly, something fundamental shifts inside you. Instead of being dragged around by every thought, every fear, and every emotional reaction, you start to rest in a deeper place of stability. You stop trying to control every cloud that moves through the sky of your mind, and you discover the freedom of simply being the sky itself. This shift may sound subtle, but its impact on your life is profound. When your identity moves from thought to awareness, your inner world becomes calmer and more spacious. Decisions become clearer because they are no longer driven by panic or mental noise. Relationships deepen because you are finally present with the people in front of you instead of being lost in the commentary inside your head. Even your creativity and intuition begin to expand because they arise naturally from the quiet space of awareness rather than from mental struggle. The lesson here is not about trying to fix your mind or forcing yourself to think differently every moment of the day. The real transformation begins when you recognize that you were never the mind in the first place. Your mind is simply a powerful tool, a narrator that helps you navigate practical situations. But it was never meant to define who you are. Your true identity is the awareness that notices thoughts without becoming trapped inside them. And the beautiful part is that this awareness has always been here. It has been present in every moment of your life, patiently waiting for you to notice it. The practice is surprisingly simple, but incredibly powerful. Throughout your day, pause for a moment and notice the thoughts passing through your mind just as you would watch clouds drifting across the sky. You do not need to fight them. You do not need to silence them. Simply observe them. Over time, this small shift changes the entire way you experience life. Instead of reacting automatically, you respond with clarity. Instead of being controlled by every passing emotion, you remain grounded in a deeper sense of inner peace. This is the beginning of true freedom. Not freedom from thoughts, but freedom from believing that every thought defines you. If this message resonated with you, take a moment to reflect on it today. Notice one thought that appears in your mind and simply watch it pass without getting involved. You might be surprised by how much space and calm you discover in that simple act of awareness. And if you found value in this video, consider supporting the channel by liking the video and subscribing. Your support helps us continue creating content that explores consciousness, personal growth, and the deeper mechanics of the human mind. Thank you for spending this time with us, and I hope this insight stays with you long after the video ends.